On an abandoned stretch of highway, inside a forgotten diner, a 45-year-old black former trucker, alone, clinging to the dream he once shared with his late wife, now facing foreclosure and mounting debts. When 10 young stranded truckers stumbled in after a brutal blizzard, he didn't hesitate to open his doors, offering them shelter and the last of his supply. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would not only save his diner, but also revive the dream his wife had always believed in. Everwind Cafe stood alone against the vast frozen fields of Kansas, its windows glowing a weary pink against the endless stretch of snow. Once, it had been a beacon along Highway 42, a place where the hum of conversation and clatter of dishes could be heard even over the roar of passing trucks. Inside, the booth sat deserted, red vinyl cracked with age, the napkin dispensers half filled, the pie case long since emptied and scrubbed clean. A smell of old coffee hung in the air, faint but stubborn, like the lingering scent of a memory too strong to wash away. On the counter behind the till, an old CB radio sat silent, its once constant chatter nothing more than an echo of better days. Marcus Bennett, 45 years old and feeling every inch of it tonight, stood behind the counter, shoulders heavy beneath his flannel jacket, a man anchored by habit more than hope. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark skin weathered by years on the road and short-cropped hair assaulted with gray. His hands were strong, the kind of hands that remembered how to fix a rig by feel alone, but they moved slow tonight, almost reluctant, as he wiped the counter for the 4th time without really seeing it. Marcus glanced at the clock, 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes until he could flip the sign to closed and climb the narrow stairs to his tiny apartment upstairs, where the only thing waiting for him was silence. He hated the silence worst of all. It filled the spaces where the laughter of Trina, his beloved wife, once lived here, where the music from the jukebox once played, where life once bustled like a living, breathing thing. Now it was just him, the hume of the heater, and the soft creak of the building settling under the weight of another merciless winter. His eyes drifted across the room, taking in the sagging booths, the faint outline of footprints tracked in earlier by the lunch crowd, already half blotted by new dustings of snow. The cafe smelled faintly of fried food and lemon cleaner, a scent that used to feel like home but now only whispered of things slipping away. Marcus moved stiffly, counting the day's till. $2,530, $8.00. He stacked the bills carefully, more out of respect than necessity. Not enough to cover the overdue electric bill, and nowhere near enough to make a dent in the mortgage. The final notice from the bank sat tucked under the counter, its words burned into his mind even without reading them again. Of the month, auction, foreclosure. He closed the drawer with a soft thunk and stared for a long moment at the open sign, the switch just within reach. Maybe tonight, he thought. Maybe tonight would be the last. He could pack up what little mattered, sell off the old equipment, and leave Everwind to the snow and the memories. Outside, the storm thickened, the snow slanting sideways in the wind. Marcus watched it batter the windows, feeling a hollow ache open inside him. Once this place had been a shelter. Once it had been life. Now it was an anchor tied to his ankles, dragging him down. Still, he didn't flip the sign. Somewhere deep in his chest, something resisted, a stubborn flicker of pride, maybe, or foolishness. Trina had called him her oak tree. Rooted, unyielding, standing tall even as the storms bent and battered him. Marcus could almost hear her voice now, soft and teasing. "One more night, Bennett. One more night won't kill you." A sudden gust of wind rattled the door, the bell above it giving a startled jingle. Marcus turned sharply, heart jumping, expecting nothing and no one. But there, framed in the doorway, stood a man, a stranger, stamping snow from his boots. The man was tall, maybe a few years younger than Marcus, with a heavy navy jacket and a trucker's cap pulled low over his forehead. Snow clung stubbornly to his shoulders, and his face was raw from the cold, his beard rimed with frost. He hesitated on the threshold, the howling wind at his back, then stepped fully inside, pulling the door closed against the storm. His presence broke the stillness, a ripple through the frozen air. "Evenin', sir," the man said, voice roughened by cold or too many long miles. "Any chance you're still serving?" Marcus felt the words catch for a moment in his throat, the instinct to turn him away, to say sorry, kitchen's closed, but something about the man's stance, the weight of exhaustion he carried like another heavy coat, stilled him. "Yeah?" Marcus heard himself say, surprising even himself. "Coffee's still hot. Kitchen's open for a few more minutes. Take a seat anywhere." The man nodded, gratitude flashing across his features, and moved to the counter, the snow trailing behind him like a weary ghost. Marcus poured a steaming cup, slid it across the worn surface, and glanced once more at the clock. Formal conferences such as the Middle East, 5 minutes from closing, 5 minutes from shutting it all down. And yet somehow, impossibly, the light in Everwind Cafe stayed on a little longer. Marcus didn't know why he'd said yes. Maybe it was the memory of other nights, other storms. Maybe it was Trina's voice in his ear. Or maybe it was just the simple truth that a light, once lit, was meant to stay burning, even if only for one more lost traveler on the road. The coffee was halfway to the stranger's lips when the bell above the door jingled again, sharp and startling in the hush of the storm. Marcus looked up, eyebrows drawing together as 2 more figures pushed inside, stamping and shivering, their coats dusted thick with snow. They looked around like men surfacing from deep water, blinking against the warmth of the diner, the smell of burnt coffee and something softer. The first real shelter they'd seen in miles. One nodded toward Marcus with a hopeful glance. "Any chance you've got more coffee, sir?" he asked, his voice raw with cold and gratitude. Marcus, feeling something shift inside him, something slow and stubborn waking up, just gestured to the counter. "Coffee's hot. Kitchen's still open," he said. And then the doors swung open again, and again, and again. Within 10 minutes, half the booths were filled, truckers mostly, by the look of them, heavy jackets, worn boots, the road etched deep into their faces. They moved slow, some with the dazed look of men who'd been driving through whiteout conditions for hours, maybe days. Marcus recognized it. He'd worn that look himself once, back when the road was home and a safe haven like Everwind meant the difference between a good night and something worse. They came in 2s and 3s, each one dragging the cold inside with them, each one asking the same question with eyes half frozen. "Please tell me the door's still open." The first man, Sam Marcus learned, seemed to naturally take charge, helping others brush snow off their shoulders, sliding menus down the counter, keeping voices low but steady. Marcus worked the coffee pot like a man possessed, refilling cups almost as soon as they were drained, moving to the grill with a kind of automatic muscle memory that had lain dormant for too long. Burgers sizzled on the flat top, toast popped up from the ancient toaster, and Marcus realized with a small jolt that he hadn't cooked this much food at once in months. "Highway's shut down, about 10 miles back," Sam said, in between mouthfuls of eggs and hash browns, speaking loud enough for Marcus to hear over the low rumble of conversation. "State Patrol's blocking it both ways. They say it's whiteout conditions all the way up past Milford. Won't reopen till at least morning, maybe longer if the wind don't die down." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He glanced out the front window where the night had turned thick and blind, the headlights of parked rigs little more than blurry halos in the swirling snow. If the highway was shut, these men, these strangers, weren't going anywhere. He thought about the battered heater, already groaning under the strain. He thought about the freezer, about the supplies that were already stretched thin even before tonight, and then he thought about Trina's voice, patient and calm, the way she used to remind him that the cafe wasn't just a business, it was a promise, a light on the road for anyone who needed it. The young waitress, Tara, came bustling out from the back, cheeks pink from the cold storage room. Marcus had told her not to bother coming in today, that there wouldn't be enough business to make it worth the trip through the snow, but Tara was stubborn as a mule, like he and Trina had been, and she'd shown up anyway, brushing off his concern with a grin and a shrug. Now she hurried between tables, passing out mugs and plates, exchanging quick smiles and words with the driver. "We're low on almost everything," Tara whispered as she leaned in by the grill, her hands already chapped from washing dishes. "I found some stew meat and a few frozen pies, but after that—" Her voice trailed off. Marcus nodded, not needing her to finish. He knew the ledger in his head better than any book could show. He wiped his hands on a towel, feeling the weight of the night settle heavier across his broad shoulders. 12 men, maybe more, still out there trying to find somewhere to ride out the storm. Freezer half empty, bills unpaid, heat threatening to give out at any minute. And yet when he looked around, saw the way the men leaned toward their mugs like they were lifelines, saw the grateful way they huddled into the booths and thawed just a little under the hume of soft lights and the smell of frying onions, Marcus felt a deep certainty settle into his bones. He couldn't turn them away. He wouldn't. Marcus made his decision the way he'd made every hard decision since he was old enough to know what loyalty meant. Fast, certain, no second guessing. He turned to Sam, who was sipping his coffee with slow reverence. "You all got somewhere to stay tonight?" Marcus asked, voice low, steady. Sam shook his head, looking out the window where the snow now blanketed the road in thick, ghostly drifts. "Motel's full. Last one I passed was packed 2 hours ago. Guess we were thinking we'd sleep in our rigs." A ripple of uneasy laughter ran through the room, but Marcus didn't smile. He remembered too well what sleeping in a frozen truck cab could do to a man's body. He remembered the way cold could creep into your bones and stay there, no matter how many miles you drove afterward. "You can't sleep in your trucks," Marcus said, voice cutting through the murmur like a blade. "Not in this cold. You'll freeze before morning." Sam opened his mouth to argue pride was a stubborn thing, but Marcus lifted a hand. "I got an apartment upstairs, 2 beds, some floor space. It ain't much, but it's warm, and the cafe," he looked around, feeling the memories stitched into the very walls. "The cafe's open. Stay as long as you need." There was a long moment where no one spoke, just the howling wind pressing against the building, the soft clink of a coffee cup settling onto its saucer. Then Sam stood up, stuck out his hand across the counter. "Name's Sam Rivers," he said, "and you're a damn good man, mister." "Marcus Bennett," Marcus said, gripping the offered hand with a strength that surprised him. "Well, Mr. Bennett," Sam said, his grin slow and warm like a sunrise pushing back a long night, "looks like you just saved a whole lot of stubborn fools from a bad night." But inside Everwind Cafe the light stayed warm and the doors stayed open, and for the first time in a long time Marcus Bennett felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't standing alone against the storm anymore. Marcus moved through the narrow kitchen like a man possessed, grabbing whatever supplies he could find, making mental lists with the efficiency born from years of muscle memory. Tara was at his side without needing to be asked, pulling out boxes of instant pancake mix, a sack of potatoes, a few battered cans of chili, and a frozen bag of chicken wings from the bottom of the freezer that he'd forgotten about. It wasn't much. Not nearly enough to run a kitchen for a night, much less feed a dozen hungry men waiting out a storm. Marcus felt the weight of it tightening across his chest, a cold knot of reality, but he shoved it down. This wasn't about profit. It wasn't about stretching supplies or balancing budgets anymore. This was about what was right. This was about not letting good men freeze to death in their trucks while he sat warm behind locked doors. The grill hissed as he dropped patties and bread onto it, the smell of cooking meat rolling through the diner like a signal flare. The low conversations at the tables died down as the truckers sat up straighter, the simple, primal scent of food cutting through exhaustion and fear. A younger man, no more than 25 by the look of him, approached the counter hesitantly. His name was Caleb, he said, a rookie driver on his first solo run. His hands trembled as he cradled his coffee mug, not entirely from the cold. "Sir," Caleb said, voice cracking a little, "you sure you got enough? We don't want to, be a burden or anything." Marcus wiped his hands on a towel, studying the kid for a moment, seeing the uncertainty, the way fear and pride wrestled behind his tired eyes. He thought about how many nights he'd felt the same way, stranded on some forgotten stretch of road, wondering if anyone would care enough to leave the light on. "You ain't a burden," Marcus said firmly, letting the words carry weight, letting them settle in the heavy air of the diner. "You're exactly why this place is here." Caleb nodded, swallowing hard, and returned to his booth, shoulders a little straighter. Marcus turned back to the grill, flipping burgers, buttering toast, his mind racing ahead. He needed to stretch what little he had. Tara slid a notepad across the counter, already scribbling down rough meal ideas based on their dwindling supplies. Chili sandwiches, scrambled eggs, canned peaches if anyone needed something sweet. Marcus grunted his approval. They would make it work. They had to. Another gust of wind rattled the windows, the storm roaring its fury against the fragile walls of the cafe. For a moment Marcus imagined what it would have been like if he'd flipped that sign, if he'd closed the door, turned off the lights, and left these men to fend for themselves against a night like this. The thought made his stomach turn. That wasn't how he was raised. That wasn't the man Trina had loved. No, he thought, as he wiped sweat from his brow and plated another burger. When someone knocked on your door in the middle of a storm, you opened it. You fed them. You gave them shelter. You didn't count the cost. You counted the blessing that you had something to give at all. By midnight, the diner had transformed. The booths were full, the counter lined with plates and mugs, the air thick with the sounds of life, forks scraping plates, low laughter, the muted murmur of conversations that spoke more of survival than celebration. Tara, cheeks flushed and hair escaping her ponytail, moved with the fluid grace of someone who belonged here, weaving between tables, refilling coffee without being asked. Marcus felt an odd, fierce pride swell in his chest watching her. The same pride he'd once felt standing shoulder to shoulder with Trina behind this very counter. The storm outside raged harder than ever, the windows rattling against their frames, but inside Everwind Cafe glowed warm and steady, a defiant star in the frozen darkness. Marcus moved among the booths, his big hands steady, his voice calm, making sure everyone had what they needed, making sure no one was left alone. And for the first time in a long, long time, he didn't feel alone either. Not in here, not tonight. The hours slipped by unnoticed, the storm outside sealing them all into a small, warm world of coffee steam, flickering lights, and the soft, steady hum of voices rising and falling like the tide. Marcus moved among them, topping off mugs, clearing empty plates, sharing small words here and there, but mostly just listening. It had been so long since Everwind Cafe had been filled with anything but ghosts that the sound of real, living conversation felt like a balm, soaking into the cracked tiles and tired wood. It was Caleb who spoke first, the rookie driver who still looked too young to have the weight of the road etched into his bones. He sat at the corner booth, a half-eaten plate of scrambled eggs in front of him, fiddling nervously with his fork before clearing his throat. "First time out on a solo haul," he said, glancing around like he was confessing a crime. "Didn't expect to get stranded my second night." There was a ripple of low laughter, the kind that wasn't mocking but knowing, and Marcus caught Sam exchanging a grin with one of the older drivers across the room. "You ain't really a trucker till you've been snowed in somewhere you can't pronounce," drawled a broad-shouldered man near the counter, whose name Marcus had learned was Henry. He had a voice like gravel and a face like worn leather, and when he leaned back in his seat, the chair creaked in protest. "Hell, the first time I got caught in a storm, I ended up sleeping in a ditch outside a bait shop in Montana. Best sleep of my life, too. Didn't wake up once till a state trooper banged on my window at dawn." The laughter grew louder, easier now, as the men relaxed into their seats, the barriers between strangers melting away like the ice clinging to their boots. They began swapping stories, old road tales that rolled out slow and steady like freight cars on a long, steady train. Some were funny, some were wild, some had the sharp edge of memory so real you could taste the diesel in the air. Sam told about the time he'd lost his brakes coming down Black Mountain and had to pray his way into the runaway truck ramp, tires smoking, heart hammering so hard he thought he'd pass out before he stopped. Another man. Rick, a wiry driver with a beard that looked like it could tell stories on its own, recounted getting stranded in a West Texas dust storm, trading a half-tank of diesel for a warm meal at a diner that, according to him, was little more than a shack with good pie and bad coffee. Marcus leaned against the counter, arms folded, a small smile tugging at his mouth. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Just being there, hearing them talk, was enough. It was the language of the road, a brotherhood not written in contracts but in calloused hands and long, lonely miles. At some point, Henry's rough voice cut through the easy murmur. "This place reminds me of another diner I knew years back," he said, tapping his coffee cup absently. "Way up in Nebraska, just a little pull-off joint off Highway 83. Owner was a driver himself before he hung up his keys. Damned if he didn't make the best cornbread I ever tasted." "What was it called?" Caleb asked, leaning forward. Henry furrowed his brow, thinking. Something like Bennett Stop. No, that's not right. Maybe Eversummin. Everbright? Marcus felt his chest tighten sharply, but he stayed silent, waiting. Sam, who had been thumbing through a stack of old photos pinned to the wall behind the counter, suddenly froze. He reached out, tracing a finger along a faded picture tucked into the frame of a group shot. Truckers lined up outside a sunlit diner, grinning like fools, arms slung around each other's shoulders. "You mean Everwind?" Sam said, glancing back over his shoulder at Henry. "Everwind Cafe?" Henry snapped his fingers, grinning. "That's it. Everwind. How could I forget? Damn place got me through more bad runs than I can count." "Place run by a guy named Marcus Bennett?" Sam asked, though there was already certainty in his voice. Marcus straightened, feeling the heat rising to his ears, the weight of 100 nights, 1,000 miles pressing against his ribs. "Still is," Marcus said quietly. There was a pause, a beat in the air as everyone seemed to register it at once. The quiet man who had kept the lights on tonight, who had fed them with the last scraps from his freezer, wasn't just another diner owner. He was one of them. He was part of the road, the old brotherhood that knew no color, no town lines, only the miles and the code you lived by when the storms came and you had nothing left but the kindness of strangers. Sam set the photo down carefully, like it was something sacred. "You don't forget a place like this," he said, voice low and sure. "You don't forget a man like that." More voices chimed in, scattered memories bubbling to the surface. One man remembered Marcus pulling over on a sleeting night in Missouri to help him tarp down a load before it blew off into the darkness. Another recalled how, during the hurricane floods down south, Marcus had driven a rig full of bottled water and supplies when no one else dared to make the crossing. A woman at the far end of the counter, small and fierce in a way that didn't match her size, remembered a voice over the CB radio, calm and steady, guiding her down a black ice mountain pass when she thought for sure she wasn't going to make it. Each story layered onto the next until Marcus felt almost overwhelmed, almost undone. He hadn't thought anyone would remember. He hadn't thought it mattered. He had just done what he thought was right back then, just like he was doing tonight. And now somehow it was all coming back to him. The laughter died down into a softer, more reverent silence, and Marcus realized he was standing a little taller, his hands unclenching, the old weight on his shoulders lifting just enough for him to breathe a little easier. Outside, the storm still howled, beating against the walls. But inside Everwind Cafe, the only thing that mattered was the warmth between strangers. The stories shared across battered tables and the simple, stubborn light that refused to go out. By dawn, the snow had eased into a fine mist, swirling like smoke across the frozen parking lot. But the drifts piled against the door were nearly as tall as the windows, and the road beyond was still little more than a rumor under the unbroken white. Inside Everwind Cafe, the world had shrunk to a warm cocoon of battered tables, stained mugs, and a dozen men who had weathered the long night not just by sharing heat, but by sharing stories, laughter, and something Marcus hadn't felt in far too long, a kind of belonging that wrapped around the ribs and held tight. Around 9, the rumble of engines outside stirred everyone to attention. A few of the drivers moved to the window, brushing away the fog to peer into the whitening morning. Marcus followed, heart thudding against his ribs, expecting to see a snowplow maybe, or a stranded motorist finally digging out. But what he saw instead made him blink. Then blink again. A convoy of trucks was rolling into the lot, their headlights cutting twin scars through the swirling snow, engines growling low and steady, the sound more like a declaration than a noise. First one, then three, then 7 semis pulled in. Their trailers glinting with frost, their sides marked with names and logos Marcus didn't immediately recognize. More were lining up along the highway, waiting their turn to pull in, idling in the shoulder with the slow patience of men who knew there was nowhere more important to be right now than here. Sam was already at the door, pushing it open against the stubborn resistance of packed snow. The cold bit deep immediately, but Marcus hardly noticed as he followed him outside, the others trailing close behind. The drivers stepped down from their rigs, their boots crunching over the ice, and Marcus realized with a jolt that not all of them were from last night. Some faces were unfamiliar. Younger drivers, older ones, men and women both. But they all wore the same look of steady determination as they gathered in the lot, stomping their feet, clapping hands to warm themselves, forming a loose semicircle around Marcus without needing to be told. Sam turned to face him, his breath a cloud in the frigid air, and for a long moment he said nothing, just grinned that slow, warm grin of his before jerking his thumb back at the line of trucks. "We made some calls," he said, voice carrying over the rumble of engines and the keening wind. "Told a few folks what went down here last night. About what you did, about what you built." His voice roughened slightly, but he pressed on, trying to make it quick. "Turns out, Mr. Bennett, you're a bit of a legend out there." A few chuckles rolled through the crowd, but they were fond, respectful. Marcus felt his throat tighten painfully, his hands balling unconsciously at his sides. One of the new arrivals, a man wearing a company jacket with a name patch that read Porter Logistics, stepped forward, extending a gloved hand. "Name's Will Porter," he said. "I manage a fleet that runs this corridor 6 days a week. We're always hunting for honest stops, places that treat drivers like human beings, not just wallets. I'd like to set up a regular route schedule through here. Fuel up, eat, rest. Got about 50 trucks. Maybe more if the word gets out." Before Marcus could find his voice to respond, another stepped up, a wiry woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, introducing herself as the regional coordinator for a supply company. Then another, and another. Offers of contracts, regular service routes, supply runs, partnerships. Promises to bring their people, to spread the word, to keep Everwind Cafe alive, because they needed it as much as Marcus had needed them. Sam pulled a thick envelope from his jacket, handing it to Marcus without fanfare. "Donations," he said simply. "Truckers, small companies, folks who remember what it felt like when someone left the porch light on for 'em. Should be enough to catch up the mortgage. Maybe get some proper food back in that freezer, too." Marcus took the envelope with hands that shook despite the numbness, the weight of it sinking into his palm heavier than it should have been, heavier with meaning. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out, just a rough sound caught somewhere between a laugh and a sob. One of the older drivers, a man with a thick beard and bright eyes, stepped forward, holding something carefully wrapped in a rag. "Found this in my garage last night," he said, offering it to Marcus. It was a CB radio handset, battered but still gleaming under the layers of time. "You gave me your backup when mine busted outside Cheyenne back in '97. Said you'd always keep the line open. Figured maybe this ought to come back home." Marcus took the radio reverently, feeling the familiar heft of it, the memories stitched into every scratch and dent. Without thinking, he crossed to the counter, where the old base unit still sat gathering dust. The handset clicked into place with a soft, perfect finality, like it had been waiting all this time for him to come back and finish what he started. Behind him, Tara wiped at her eyes openly, no longer bothering to pretend she wasn't crying, and Sam clapped Marcus on the back hard enough to nearly knock him forward. One of the younger drivers, a wiry kid named Kevin, who Marcus remembered helping with a busted trailer tire a few months back, stepped forward nervously, unrolling a large sheet of thick paper. "We, kinda had an idea," he said. "Hope you don't mind." He turned the paper around, revealing a design for a new sign. Everwind Haven. A light for every traveler. Marcus stared at it, the words blurring and swimming, the edges of the world going soft and golden around him. He thought about Trina, about the long nights they'd spent dreaming of this place. not for money, not for fame, but because they believed in it. Believed in a world where you opened your doors when the storms came and trusted that somebody, someday, would do the same for you. The CB crackled to life behind him, a burst of static giving way to a voice, somewhere out on the road, clear and certain, calling out into the morning. Breaker 19, anyone got ears on Everwind? Heard there's still a light on out there. Marcus leaned into the mic, heart pounding, voice steady. Everwind's here, he said, his voice carrying out across the miles, across the storms, across the silent spaces of the world. And the light's still on. A year later, Everwind Cafe barely resembled the tired little place it had been on that storm-choked night, though if you looked closely, you could still find the same bones, the same stubborn heart beating beneath the new polish. The parking lot had been expanded, now able to hold 24 rigs comfortably, with wide, clear pull-throughs and new lighting that stayed on from dusk to dawn. A small trucker's lounge had been added to the side of the building, complete with clean showers, soft couches, and a couple of battered pool tables donated by drivers who said they'd rather see them here than gathering dust in some forgotten basement. Inside, the cafe had been carefully refreshed, not gutted, not stripped of its soul, but cleaned, brightened, given back its dignity. The counter gleamed under new varnish, the vinyl on the booths had been repaired, and a fresh coat of soft cream paint made the walls feel welcoming without losing the history written into every creak of the floorboards. The biggest change wasn't something you could see, though. It was something you felt the moment you pushed open the door. Everwind hadn't just survived. It had become something larger, something living. It had become a home for anyone whose life was measured in miles and hours and the long, lonely stretches between stops. The laughter was back, low and constant like the murmur of a river. The smell of frying bacon and strong coffee wrapped around you like a blanket, and through it all, that old CB radio behind the counter crackled and hummed, voices drifting in from every compass point, carrying news, jokes, road warnings, and greetings from drivers who now made Everwind a deliberate part of their journey. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.